I'd just like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the original storytellers and placemakers, the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting on tonight, the Wadawurrung people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. My name is Stacie Bobele. I'm one of the Arts and Culture Officers here at the City of Greater Geelong. Tonight I'm going to be presenting Making Grant Applications Easy. This is the second part of our grant sessions. The last session was about writing about your work. You don't have to have attended the first one. It's not like a sequel. This is a standalone. I will refer to a couple of things that I mentioned in the previous workshop, but I'll go through them again. Just housekeeping. We've got refreshments down the side here. Help yourself to a tea, coffee. We've got soy, normal, other milk. We've got some Mentos here and a few little bickies. Toilets, if you go straight out this door and walk straight in a straight line across the corridor, they'll be on your left-hand side. The session tonight is going to be recorded. You'll see Mitchell over here, and we will have it available as a video, and we will be providing all of the resources that I mentioned tonight in an email, a follow-up email to you all within the next week or so. So don't feel compelled to write absolutely everything down, just in case you missed something. Okay. So thanks for coming along. I think this workshop has been misnamed somewhat. It should really be making grant applications less hard. Because they're probably never easy, but we'll get there tonight. I'm not sure they should ever really be easy though, because they should actually force you to examine what you're doing closely and undertake research on your practice, on your project, your organisation in a focused way that you'd otherwise never get to do. Grant money isn't easy money either. It rarely comes from a bottomless pool of funding without any strings attached. And writing an application takes thought and planning. So at the end of the day, the purpose of grant money is to offer opportunity to individuals within a community to deliver projects or outcomes that reflect the shared goals of that community. It's a win-win for both artists and the organisation. So tonight's session's in 3 parts. In the first section, we'll talk about what you need to do before you put pen to paper. In the second section, we'll look at the Smarty Grants application layout, which is the system that we use to process our grant applications. And then I'll provide some hints around what content you'll need to address each of the questions that are within our grant application. The final part will talk about what to do once you find out an outcome. All right, so before you start, plan your project. It's pretty obvious, but you've got a great idea for a project or a new work to present. You know you need money. Apply for a grant, everyone says, and this can feel somewhat daunting and sometimes overwhelming, and some of you may think, yeah, grant money easy. It can feel a bit at times like all and none of these things, and the key to making grant applications easy is the planning element. So when you're assessing, I've assessed a few grant applications in my time, and I've written a few too, but and the one thing that I've noticed is that not only can an unplanned project be spotted a mile away by assessors, but going through the steps of what's required in order to get your project off the ground will also help you determine what's needed and what type of grant you'll be looking for. It may be a great idea, but have you thought about how much money you need? Where are the shortfalls? How long will the project take to develop? When will it be delivered? Where will it be held? What are the outcomes? Who will be helping you and what are their roles? Who are the stakeholders, those with an interest in the outcomes of your project and those with a stake in it, or those who are helping you with it and helping you get it off the ground? Who will be directly affected and who will benefit from this project? And have you formally contacted all of them? What are your priorities? Have you looked at all the risks, and do you have contingencies just in case you don't achieve meeting your budget or securing your preferred venue? So answering all of these questions are not only great for planning, but they'll also help you find the right grant, and they'll also form the basis of how you write that grant. So it's important to find the right one that suits what you're trying to do. Not all grants are created equal or have their own specific objectives and types of support. So before you start, make sure the grant you are looking at provides funding to match your proposal. So checking basic eligibility is as simple as checking a list. Like, we have a list of who is and isn't eligible in our arts grant guidelines, and most grants provide that for you, and it's normally in the first 1 or 2 pages of those guidelines. There's no point trying to make your project fit the grant. So certainly you can finesse your application to focus on certain elements of your project that meet the key criteria. But if your grant is a project-based grant and you're looking for money for infrastructure or business as usual, it won't work and it'll be a waste of your time. An example would be if some grants fund one-off activities and cultural projects, while others will fund operational and ongoing costs, which is business as usual. Some fund infrastructure and equipment, while others fund professional development for artists. So the objectives of each grant will be, I'll clearly spell them out in some examples. I've just got a couple of examples of other grants just to show you the differences, but this Creative Hobart grant is a project-based grant, and this is quite obvious in the first couple of paragraphs. And they also mention in the 4th paragraph, which is really key, our major cultural organisations grants assist eligible organisations with operational and ongoing program support. So there's that differentiation there. They're saying the Creative Hobart grants are for eligible organisations and groups to deliver one-off activities involving artists and communities in the creation, direction and management of cultural projects. They tell you where they must take place, and then they make that differentiation between their major organisational grants, which is more of an operational, and I guess, which is that business as usual, which is what I was talking about before. The City of Melbourne grant, these, again, it's another project-based grant helping ideas come to life. So you're looking at specific arts projects. They talk about the different types of arts they'll support, and how much those grants will be worth. And then you've got professional development grants like this one that's offered by the Government of South Australia. Now, we offer professional development grants as well. And we also offer, in addition to the arts project grants, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, we've got professional development grants and quick response grants. No, we don't anymore.
Not anymore.
The professional development replace those?
Professional development will continue.
Right.
And the quick response will be replaced with something to be determined.
Right, okay. So watch this space.
Yeah.
Andrew's working on it right now. All right. And then you've got event grants, which we've got a handy table which you can access. There's a link to our information from our information sheet that's online, and that's what this is from. So, and it helps you determine which grant would be better for your event. So the arts project grants will cover events that are performances, theatre productions, public experiences, launches, openings, workshops and panel discussions. If you have an event that comes under any of these other categories, City of Greater Geelong do have grants that can help you out, but they are not under the arts project grants. So this table is accessible, as I said, through our website. And you can refer to that later. If you've got any questions about your eligibility in terms of the project you're proposing and you're not sure whether it fits within the Arts Project Grant guidelines or not after I've finished this session, come and see us. We'll be hanging around at the end and we can answer the questions for you.
This is on the net, on the internet.
That's right, yep. And yeah, as I said, we'll send you links to all of these as resources in the next week or so. And this is the ineligible event types that don't get covered by any of our grants, and that too is in that table. This is the list of being eligible, ineligible. So the City of Greater Geelong grants consider grants from not-for-profits, which are incorporated bodies, co-ops or associations, registered charitable organisations, unincorporated bodies with an auspice, for-profits. So if you're a business that's running for profit, you may still be eligible to apply for funding through this grant. And individual and sole traders that have an ABN with the Australian Business Register. What we won't fund are schools and learning institutions, individuals without an ABN, applicants with outstanding acquittals for grants funding from the city, and that includes auspices. So if the organisation you've gone to help you with an auspice still has an outstanding acquittal, then we won't be able to consider your application. So in your conversation with your auspice, you should probably ask them that. It's one of the first questions. I'll talk about auspicing in a second. Applicants with outstanding debts or arrears to City of Greater Geelong or in legal proceedings with the City, and an organisation involved in legal proceedings to wind up operations are insolvent or bankrupt. So auspicing. An auspicing body is usually a larger organisation that takes legal and financial responsibility for a funded project being delivered by an individual artist or smaller organisation. If your project is collaborating with a not-for-profit or delivering in a community or neighbourhood house, you may be able to ask them to auspice your application. That's a really good, obvious one there. What it means is that the funds are issued through the auspice organisation rather than to you. So you'll need to establish a really good relationship with this organisation. You need to discuss the details of auspicing with them very closely. You need to work out who's going to be doing what throughout the whole process. It'll be likely that most of the organisation and collation of all the relevant documentation will come to you, but they will probably want you to report to them on a regular basis to just make sure everything's going well. There is another organisation that exists, Auspicious Arts. They've been set up specifically. They're another, I think they're a not-for-profit as well, but they have set themselves up specifically to assist artists get projects off the ground who either do not have, I guess, the necessary eligibility criteria of being having their own ABN number, or maybe they do, but they just don't feel like they are big enough. So Auspicious Arts will step in and they help to provide a financial framework that's similar to a larger organisation. So that gives you that bit of extra backup. They require a bit of detail before they will bring you on board, but all of their details are on their website, and we'll provide details of that with our resource package. All right, establishing a budget. So you know exactly what your project is, so you need to get down to working out how much money it's going to take to get it to life. All grant applications will ask for a project budget. Invariably, grant money will not cover the entire cost of a project. That's not always the case, but invariably your costs will exceed the amount of a grant. So you'll need to work out how to make up that shortfall, basically. So do you have any other sources of funding, like from other organisations or other, I guess you may have gone to your community bank. They quite often have grants for community artists and organisations. You may have gotten a kind donation from your rich neighbour, or your own organisation may be making a cash contribution. What can also be considered is in-kind offerings. So you may have some friends who are willing to contribute their expertise and time to help you out, say with some graphic design, for instance, or even help you with the project management. All of these things can be added into your budget as actual, I guess, funds that have been donated, even though it's voluntary. Knowing exactly how much money you need for your project will also help you decide whether putting the time and effort in is that's required from a grant application will be worth it. So taking into consideration planning time, writing time, following up letters of support and communicating with your stakeholders, and then acquitting the grant, all of this adds up to donated hours to prepare. So if you're applying for a grant that is only worth probably a quarter or less of the overall cost of your project, and you cannot use the work you've done on this grant for other applications, which is, you can use parts of what you do, it certainly won't be wasted, but I always recommend people revisit each individual grant as if they've never started before. You can certainly draw on all the research you've done, but 9 times out of 10, each individual grant will be asking specifics that are quite different. So that means that each application will require a bit of work. So think about all of these things when you're applying for your grant, and just to work out whether it is actually worth your time and effort to put that application in. So some things to consider for your budget is your fee. So make sure you pay yourself. So many times I've seen people organise projects and they don't even pay themselves, but they pay everyone else. So pay artist fees, and NAVA has a really great code of practice with a full listing of all kinds of recommended rates for all kinds of arts professionals, not just artists. So event running costs, have you checked if you'll need security? That's something a lot of people don't plan on. Will you need to hire equipment like PAs, lighting, staging? Catering should be considered, even though our grant won't cover catering. There's materials. So materials required to develop an artwork, permit fees, web development and design, graphic design costs and printing, venue hire, Auslan interpretation services. So if you're planning a presentation with a lot of people attending, you may want to plan to include Auslan interpretation services as well in your costs, and of course traditional owner engagement costs. So start a spreadsheet. So while you're busy writing down all the plans for what kind of project you'll be planning, start a spreadsheet. Or if that scares you, just start a list of anticipated project tasks. So you don't need to be a whiz at Excel or anything, but it's just good to have a list of your tasks and the corresponding costs. So, and alongside these costs, make a list of how they might be paid or covered by in-kind or pro bono work. So this will help you when you come to actually sit down at your computer and do the Smarty Grants application. So we come to building a case. Many people applying for a grant fall at this first hurdle, which is being able to articulate the project in a way that is clear and understandable to those who are assessing the grant. If this is a project that you've developed, it's likely you've talked about it so many times the whole concept is really obvious to you, but you need to be able to explain it succinctly and clearly in an articulate way on the page and within a certain word limit. So this is where using the who, what, why, where and how is useful to use when you're making your notes about what kind of project this is. So make no assumptions that people know what you're talking about and include every last bit of detail when you're doing this part of the work. So work back from the big picture or the outcome of your project, look at each element and jot down everything that's required to pull each of those elements together. No detail is too small to not be included. I talked about this in my last workshop on writing about your work and writing for grants. But we went over basic copywriting skills, and these can certainly be applied in a grant writing context. And you can have a look at that workshop online via City of Greater Geelong's YouTube channel. And I talk about these copywriting top 5. So this is pretty basic, like who'll be reading this piece of writing? Well, the audience is a grant assessor. So the context and purpose, and I'll talk about this, you need to align it with the organisation's values, and I will go into this in just a sec. So clarity, so using plain English, don't get fancy, keep it as simple as possible, and dot points are your friend. So you can certainly include dot points in your grant application. Don't think you can't. In fact, I love seeing dot points in a grant application. So your tone of voice is confident and knowledgeable. So not airy-fairy and not hopeful. So you've got to get that nice balance in between of being confident and showing that you know exactly what you're doing and that you've planned this really well. And thinking strategically, and this is something I went into detail about in that last workshop. So what's the idea and why does it matter to my audience? So thinking about your audience is the City of Greater Geelong and the arts and culture strategy that it's addressing. So you've got to show the impact or show how you've considered the objectives of the city in the development of this project. Not necessarily the development of the project, but how elements of your project do address those strategic objectives. So include a solution to the problem. So the problem is like one of the objectives of the arts and culture strategy, how your work is addressing that. And keep it short and to the point. So it's good to go through the guidelines and identify the key words within those guidelines to get a good, concept of what these grants, what the organisation is why the organisation is offering these grants and what they're hoping to address. So we've actually put the 6 objectives from the Arts and Culture Strategy as part of the objectives of these grants. So about these grants, the purpose of the arts projects grants is to cultivate the strength, diversity and vitality of our city's arts and cultural ecosystem, engage the whole community in our city's cultural life and celebrate our city's distinct, diverse and evolving culture. So we've got a link to the strategy in the info pack on the arts project grants, so you can have a read through them. But they've been summarised here. So the objectives are to build awareness and knowledge of First Nations people culture and engage First Nations artists to lead project development or consultation, to encourage cross-art form and industry collaboration and partnerships for a vibrant arts and cultural ecosystem which supports local and municipal-wide creative endeavour, increase opportunities for community participation and diverse engagement through inclusive and accessible arts and cultural programs, etc., etc. So going through there, I looked at for keywords and phrases, and the ones that stood out for me were collaboration and partnerships, municipal-wide creative endeavour. So if you've gone quite broad with who you're engaging across the municipality. Opportunities for community participation, diverse engagement, inclusive and accessible, our local heritage and stories, high quality contemporary practice, and diverse and non-traditional indoor and outdoor locations. So they were all the keywords that stood out to me, and they can all be traced back to the strategic plan. So it's your job as part of your application to link these keywords to that strategy and then expand on these and directly relate and apply these objectives to your project. So how do you do this? So who is delivering this project? Is it just you? Will you be collaborating? Who will be assisting you with the delivery of this? For example, are you working with a community group? What are the anticipated outcomes of your project? So not just an exhibition or event, for example, what other engagements or discussions or learnings will be gained in the development of your project? So not necessarily what's going to happen with the event itself, but what happens in the lead up to that event. So who are you talking to? Who are you engaging with? What information are you getting from the community in order to develop your project? Like in the audiences, like who will you engage in and the anticipated numbers, that's another one too. Are you targeting a specific audience and why are you targeting that audience? What data do you have to support that audience needs your particular project? And this brings us to the why. So community need, are you addressing a need in the community? How do you identify it? Do you have stats to back this up or other evidence? Can you relate this to the vision of City of Greater Geelong? Future thinking. What are the anticipated impacts in the future? Include that. Like beyond what you have planned with what you're using this round of grant money for, how do you anticipate that what you're doing now will impact further into the future? That's also a great thing to refer to. And what's your vision? So does it fit in with a longer term vision for yourself or your organisation? And how does it fit within that vision? If your proposal is part of a bigger project, it's important to contextualise it within a bigger picture. So you need to tell us where it sits within that bigger picture. So where will it be located and who will need to be involved because of that location or venue? So think about the location and the authorities you may have to engage with, such as council, or if you're near the ocean, the Marine Parks Authority, for example. Do you have plans to tour your show in the future? What other venues or galleries or other artists and creatives, community groups or businesses will be engaged in the development of the project? And how? How are you going to deliver the project? So what skills do you and your group currently have? How will you make up that shortfall? Including capacity building as part of your project is something that many local government grants like to see. And can you engage someone to help you with this capacity building? And collaboration. And will you be undertaking the project with others? Will there be skills shared and gained? And will you involve a volunteer base? Capacity building and volunteers is something that's also really favourably looked upon in project development and with grant applications. So ChatGPT I spoke about briefly in our last session as well. And I bring it up only because it's a useful starting point. So it can help you structure an application. It's basically drawing on all the information on the web that surrounds grants, and there is a lot out there. So it can really pull together, I guess, a good structure for how to address a specific question. Now, it won't give you the specifics about your project, but I won't say will, because it's still a little bit dodgy. It's not always great and needs to be used with a very critical eye. But it can help you when you're sitting at a blank page and you don't know where to start. Just doing something as simple as, put together put together 4 points that address this particular question in a grant application, and it'll come back to you with, I guess, a good structure for how you might phrase an answer to that question. But as I said, use with caution and a very critical eye. I have been speaking with colleagues the last couple of weeks from different sources, like who work within the arts and who work within education. And someone was speaking to me this morning, they were assessing job applications, and it is still pretty obvious who has used ChatGPT without a critical eye. If you're just putting in the data and then taking whatever is popped out, it will be noticed. But like I said, it's a really good starting point. So what else do you need before you get down to doing the grant application itself? You can look at doing a communications plan. And again, that sounds more scary than it is, but all you really need to do is identify the who you're going to be talking to, who your audience is, what you're going to be communicating with them about, like you're providing them with information, are you going to be selling tickets, are you going to be seeking feedback, and why you're communicating with them, when you'll be communicating with them, and how. So again, this is just basically a list with some dates and when you're planning to do all of this. You can also consider at the same time, although we don't necessarily need to see it, like what your key messages are, and consider how to pose these for different audiences. Other things you can provide would be letters of support and other documentation. So this can come from relevant stakeholders and partners. They're absolutely necessary. So if you're going to be using a venue provided by another organisation, then you definitely need to have a letter of support from them. Having a letter of support from or evidence that you are receiving funding from another stakeholder organisation, that's certainly something you need to provide. If you have, say, if you're doing an activation, say, in a precinct that has other small businesses around, and you've talked to them about how it might bring in extra people to that area, if you can get them to provide you with a letter of support that says, yes, I've discussed this with the artists and it sounds like a great idea and we'd really welcome, new audiences here, then certainly that's a letter of support that is not an absolute, but would be a nice to have. So getting these letters just shows planning and that you've already established relationships, and their approval or support can help guarantee the success of your project as well. And have you received quotes for services like security, as I said before, venue hire, etc. You'll need to start collecting those because you'll need to provide those as part of your application. Collate bios of yourself and the other artists involved, showing the experience of collaborators and yourself. Start a list of possible costs and expenditure, which will feed into your budget, which I spoke about before. That spreadsheet and list of costs that I mentioned will come in handy. And start checking on guidelines or permits that may be required. So if you don't have the relevant permit at the time of application, that's fine. You just need to show evidence that you've started investigations down that track, you know that it's needed, and you've put your application in or you're about to. So this can be as simple as an email of being in touch with your relevant organisation, or just that you've started seeking advice about what you need for that. So, and that would satisfy our requirements. It's also likely that you'll require public liability insurance. So you can check this by contacting the grants team. I can double check if you're not sure. But if you have something that involves the public, you'll need public liability insurance. So this is something else that NAVA has produced as part of their code of practice. They've got a great reference guide to different types of insurances and when and why they're needed, and we'll be providing details of how to access that as well. So for this section, we'll talk about the arts project grant specifically. I'll be looking at just each of the assessment criteria that we've included in our grant, and I'll just be providing some tips on how to address each of those assessment criteria. So when you finally get around to I guess talking, like you've worked out what your project is, and you've done all the things I just talked about in the first part of the session. You know exactly what the project is, who's going to be delivering it, by and what it is, and why you're doing it, and how and when and where. You look at the guidelines that we've provided, and you've looked at the Arts and Cultural Strategic Plan. So now we're going to look at the assessment criteria. So now this is all in the application. And it's been divided up relatively evenly. Community and cultural benefits, 35%, project rationale, 35%, and well-planned project, 30%. So I'll just go through each of those criteria and things that you might want to consider when you are addressing this criteria. So for community and cultural benefit, we've got community participation and audience growth opportunities, public presentation of project, creating connections, networks and platforms for local artists and participants, inclusion of diverse artist groups or communities, economic benefit and value to artists and creative groups. So what you might want to consider here is who from the community will be involved or engaged as part of the project. And that's just not the people that you'll be working with to deliver the project. These are the people you'll be engaging as part of your audience as well. How will it be presented, and how will you ensure it's accessible for your target audience? So how will you make sure that they're aware of the project and that they're able to see it? So that is like appropriate scheduling, for instance, school holidays, inside or outside work hours, or it follows another relevant event, so you've got a similar audience that's hanging around. Creating connections, so will you be engaging with local or adjacent businesses, as I mentioned in that example before, as part of the planning and organising or presenting of the event? Will you be seeking help from other artists? Will your project create a platform for artists and participants? And how will this help, like in terms of future thinking? How is this going to help further down the track? And will you be bringing different artists together? Are you starting new collaborations, new relationships that didn't exist before? And if that is the case, you need to say explicitly that they never existed before, and this is how it's brought you together, and this is why. Will there be a diverse representation of artists? So is it part of your plan to diversify your audience? And if so, how will you target this audience or access these artists? So you're wanting to expand your audience base, and you've identified a specific audience that you want to target with that. Why are you doing that? And why do you feel that that audience needs to see your work or being involved with it? With economic benefit, obviously, do you see any economic benefit or added value to artists and creative groups as a result of your project? And this could also be knock-on effects by setting a precedent. So not just the artists involved in this particular project, but something that may come out of or as a result of you developing it. So cultural impact, we were talking about this just the other day. Culture can mean many things, and if you ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different answers. But in this case, culture can be shared beliefs, values and behaviours, as well as the development or improvement of existing norms. And it also has a meaning related to arts and creativity. So some examples we'd be looking for would be how your project has made steps towards a more creative culture or a more creative way of thinking, or the project shows the development of a culture of knowledge sharing that didn't exist before. So the second criteria is project rationale. So this is where you explain the idea and the approach and the need. And this goes back to your previous planning 100%, so the who, what, why, where and how. And you also need to draw upon the 6 key objectives of the arts and cultural strategy that were mentioned in that opening section of the information sheet. So what needs are you addressing, and have you done any surveys? Has anyone else done any surveys? So has any other organisation before you already gone into the community and asked the questions that you're wanting to answer? So, and that's what a strategy is normally. A strategy is developed by going out into the community and asking what the community wants, and then developing ways of meeting those needs through a strategy. So look at strategies that have been developed by the organisation you're applying through, and look to other surveys that may be done around that. Like there's a lot of statistical information you can access, like, you know, through the ABS at a really high level, but other reporting that has been done by other local government authorities or other arts organisations. There's a lot of data out there to be accessed. And then you need to articulate how your project addresses the objectives or needs that have been identified through that data or community consultation. So artistic merit, creative expression and innovation. So who is involved and what experience do those artists or creatives have that you're involving? What innovation are you showing in the creativity, in the development of the project, the delivery, or audience engagement, or new technologies? Could be as simple as that. And feasibility relevance will be obvious from the research you've done already. So the feasibility and relevance in particular will be borne out through you looking into that data and, I guess, community engagement that's been done before. Or it could be as simple as you've just gone to a group and said, tell me all the things that are missing from your current creative workshops program and I'll address them. That's a very basic example, but an example nonetheless. A well-planned project. So a well-planned project will have a clear community benefit and rationale behind it will be very, very clear. So a well-planned project has a realistic frame for delivery. It has considered appropriate guidelines for the payment of artists. It can show evidence of having discussed the project with all the relevant stakeholders, the partners and collaborators, and has incorporated the advice that you've received into your planning. A well-planned project has researched possible venues and locations and has checked availability and suitability of that venue or location. So, for example, the time of year and contingency plans if it's held outdoors. It has the appropriate facilities such as accessible power, or indeed just accessible access, has no restrictions on use, like a curfew, say at 7 p.m. when your event intends to run until 10. A well-planned project has identified risks and strategies for mitigations of those risks, and can demonstrate involvement of people with experience, so either directly or as mentors of the project. And a well-planned project has also addressed accessibility and inclusivity. So how do you ensure the event is accessible to as broad an audience as possible? So in that it said there was a project plan that you needed, but you don't need to freak out about that. Like a project plan is required, certainly, but you shouldn't be too worried. So a basic project plan includes a timeline, the tasks for those tasks allocated along the lines of that timeline, who is responsible for the tasks and the deadlines for those tasks. That's basically a project plan in very simple form. So for events that are a 6 to 12 month planning process, you can set up tasks on a monthly basis. For under 6 months, you can set up a weekly plan with allocated tasks and milestones. And I'm just saying this from a practicality point of view, because if you are setting it up in Excel, there's only so much you can fit on a single screen and still be able to read it. So even just in terms of readability, if it's 6 to 12 months, if you do it on a monthly basis, you'll still be able to see what's coming up really easily. Under 6 months, you can do it weekly. So if you go back to your notes, it should be obvious what all the actions that come out of all of that initial planning. So if you've got a realistic time frame, it'll show when you have to get in contact with what stakeholders, when you need to confirm venue hire. You should also include, stages in your timeline for when you're going to reassess the risks that you identified. So if you are, this is just an example, it may not be relevant to a grant context, but I'm helping a gallery at the moment organise an event, and we set, milestones, if you like, throughout that plan. So if this hasn't happened by this date, then what are we going to take out of the event so it's not as expensive? Like, say, if we don't get this additional money from this source, what are we going to remove? So, and throughout the plan, we've included the identified risk and what we're going to do at that stage to address that risk if it actually comes to fruition. And it's also good to allow time for surveys and evaluation and the time and paperwork it will require to acquit the grant. So you're not just working up to the presentation of your project, you need to also show how you've planned for how you're going to go about acquitting the grant as well, and undertaking your surveys and evaluations post-event. Okay, so more useful resources. Now, I keep going back to NABA, but they have put together some really great stuff over the past couple of years. And they've got a code of practice that has a specific section around principles, ethics and rights, which includes engaging First Nations artists, accessibility rights for deaf and disabled people, racial equality and representation, gender equality, and best practice recommendations for community engagement, which is very handy. It also includes workplace health and safety considerations, and also provides help on managing volunteers and interns. So we'll send you the link for that too. If you're working with First Nations artists or plan to include them in your project, make sure you're across the Australia Council's protocols for using First Nations cultural and intellectual property. And as I mentioned before, NAVA's Code of Practice also covers, how you should be engaging with First Nations people on your project. For any questions around First Nations engagement, you can certainly get in touch with us as well, and we can point you in the right direction locally as to who you can speak to engage with about your project. So, budget. So, as I said before, you can draw up your budget in paper or a spreadsheet, and this will make it easier to put into Smarty grants. So it only needs to be considered in terms of income and expenditure. There's also in-kind support, and how this can be considered is who is helping, and that's considered the income side of things, and what they are doing, and that's the expenditure. And how many hours they contribute doing that. So they balance each other out. The income, what you're contributing, the donations, fundraising or other grants. Getting another grant or showing that you've applied for other grants is exactly what funders like to see, and we don't mind if you apply for 1,000 other grants. It's great. It shows that you're looking around and you're really keen to get your project off the ground. It also shows you've given some thought to the requirements of your project and that you're dedicated to getting it done. So you need to also keep all of your receipts and quotes in one place. This will just make it easier for you to follow up when it comes to acquittal time. I set up a desktop folder on my computer and just throw everything in there whenever I receive it. And it's really important that you maintain accurate financial records during the project. So this saves you time when you come to do the acquittal. You're not running around trying to find all those invoices and receipts you received 9 months ago. But it can and has happened in the past that we may check up and make sure that everything's going fine, and you'll need to refer to your receipts and invoices and other financials to help us out there. Okay, so on the Smarty Grants application, you'll come to the section where you have to input all this information, and this is basically a recreation of what the income, you've got two tables. You've got an income table and then you've got an expenditure table. So this is what the income table looks like. And what might be handy for you to know too, before you go about doing your grant application, is that there is a view-only element to Smarty Grant. So you can go in and scan what the whole application looks like before you start inputting all the information. That's a really handy thing to be able to access what that application looks like before you start the project. Before you start the project of writing the grant. So you know exactly what you're in for. You can make separate notes and then go back and start doing the entry of everything you need to do. You can also save everything as you go and exit, so you don't lose everything if you don't complete it all in one hit. So you can save it and return to it later. So this is like just a really basic look of what a budget might look like. So the income, this is the anticipated income for my project. I'm hoping to get $5,000 from my City of Greater Geelong grant. Our organisation has contributed a cash donation of $500. So, and that is confirmed. So you've got a confirmed, so you have to choose whether this has been confirmed, yes or no. The community bank has come to me and said, yep, we'll give you $500 towards this, and that's been confirmed. And then I've included the in-kind admin and in-kind graphic design. So I've got a friend who's kindly donated 10 hours of his time to do some administrative work around this project, and and $30 an hour is the rate that should be charged for his level of skill. So I've included that, and the graphic design 5 hours, $50 per hour, because we've got someone on our committee who's actually pretty good at doing up websites. So this is all totaled up to $6,550 as the total budget for my project. Now the expenditure. This is what it's going to cost for me to put everything on. So the artist fees are going to cost me $3,500, and I do plan to use this money from the City of Greater Geelong grant to pay for that. I've got a project management fee, because I'm getting someone in to do that for us, and I will be using the City of Greater Geelong grant to do that, and the venue hire. That's $500, and I'll be using the grant from City of Greater Geelong for that. The remaining costs I'll not be using because the admin costs are in kind, the graphic design is in kind, the advertising and the Auslan interpretation services will be covered by the cash donation that our organisation gave and the community bank gave us. So at the end of the day, it totals $6,550. Now in the Smarty Grants application, it will calculate it automatically, and what you need to have it do is to match up. It won't let you go any further if it doesn't match. So it's really handy to work all this out before you get in there. All right, and this is, I just took a screenshot of, I think it's like the 4th page, and this just shows what it looks like, but you're probably all pretty familiar with Smarty Grants. And this is just the application details. So you get your project title and your brief project description. Now, your project title and the brief project description are probably one of the most important things to put in there, because it needs to be something that will catch the assessor's eye and will look interesting from the get-go. The brief project description of 25 words or less, that's where your succinct writing abilities will come into play. You need to be able to describe what you're going to be doing with this money in 25 words or less. All right. So questions about details of the grants, eligibility, you're not sure about whether your project fits, all questions. We do have 2 separate sections at council that deal with grants. Like, we specifically deal with arts and culture. When I say we, arts and culture deal with project questions, so anything around the development of your project, whether it fits the criteria, how you might make it fit the criteria better. Contact us at Arts and Culture. If you have questions about eligibility, like you're not sure where you sit, whether you'll need an auspice or not, if, as a for-profit, you still tick boxes, or you don't know what to put in a certain element of the application form, then you get in touch with Community Grants. They manage all of that. So, and we'll be providing those email addresses in our resources. All right, so when you'll find out, applications for this round of Arts Project Grants close on the 24th of July, and we'll be sending out notifications of success or otherwise on the 1st of December. So what happens if you're not successful? So every application should be looked at as a learning process and an investment in the future. A lot of the work you've done can be used for planning and any other grant or funding applications you may pursue. And never underestimate the benefit of planning and having thought things out really clearly in order to put a grant together, because it does actually help you with other areas of running your practice or your business. Don't be overwhelmed, and don't let the application process put you off applying either. I hope I haven't made it feel like it's overwhelming, but because I think once you're into the process, and if you've got a really clear idea in your head of what you want to do, then it will flow. And don't be disappointed if you miss out. So there are so many factors that come into play with each grant round and their assessment. It may not have anything to do with you or your project, but certainly seek feedback, and we can provide that. We can let you know like areas that you might want to consider for future applications, and that will certainly help you with applying further down the track for either this grant or other grants. So you've been successful. What do you need to do? So what we want you to do, once you've been given the grant money, you'll receive a lovely package that will have all the information in there about the grant. You'll have to sign quite a few things, and there'll also be info in there about how to keep us up to date. But we'd really love you to keep us up to date. So let us know the progress of your project, how it's all going. Like take photos, like post stuff on your socials about how your progress is going. We'd love to see those, and if you tag us in those posts, then we can send it out to the community and other people can see, I guess, what you're doing and what our grants are doing within the community, and it helps create a more vibrant culture within the city. Keep records and keep them well, as I spoke about before. This will only help you in the long run and will save you lots of time. Spending 30 seconds to file a piece of paper or an email in the right spot will save you hours down the track. So start planning for your evaluation. We do ask for a report that you'll need to do as part of your acquittal to just reflect on the project and how you thought it went. It's not onerous at all. It's got a bit of detail in there about how much you spent. Like, besides the money you spent and the countable changes that have been generated by your project, we also ask for feedback on the benefits to the community and who you, engaged as part of your project and how you did that and what the expected outcomes were and even unexpected outcomes. We love hearing about that as well. So, and while we don't require formal surveys or detailed surveys or data, these are always a nice to have. And collecting them both during and post the project will certainly be of great benefit to yourself and to us in terms of you for planning other events going forward, like what worked and what didn't. And we also like to know, what the community is thinking about all of the projects you're putting on. So photos, videos, testimonials are all welcome as part of this feedback. So certainly engage with your audience and the people that you're collaborating with to just get their feedback on how it all went. And this also helps us to continue to justify offering the grants program to the broader community and to councillors as well. If we can provide them with details on the wonderful projects that we've funded and how many people they've engaged and what they've done for the community, then that can only ensure that the grant program can continue into the future. Now, we do have a lot of questions about this from time to time. Like, people get worried that they have to adhere specifically to their original proposal, but we do recognise that lots of things come up that are out of your control and you may need to slightly adjust or change tack. Then get in touch with us and let us know as soon as you can. Like, we understand that things change, so we can discuss with you and maybe even give you some tips and hints on new directions, how you might pivot. And so, don't be a stranger when things happen. Don't wait until it gets to the end, you've got to quit and you still haven't delivered because you've just been so worried about having to change. We'd rather you get in touch with us earlier so we can work out a plan for changing direction if we need to. And we're here to help. So, and again, that's our email address to get in touch with the team here. As I said, we're here to help. So, that's pretty much it. We've provided a survey, so if you'd like to do that while I'll take questions, or if you're more comfortable in coming up to us afterwards and having a chat with Andrea and I, then we can do that too. Well, thanks everyone, and if you want to grab a bicky on the way out, then help yourself. Good to see you.